Hi, this is Bhavani from Nurture 5. Namaste. Today, our special guest is Jane Dicker, and she is joining from London. So, she moved from all the way from London to Uganda. So, let's hear a great story from her. Yeah, I wanted to touch base association with her. Jane, nice to see you after 15 years. Thanks for joining the podcast. And I still remember that New York City we met and we got involved in raising the funds for the school.
Yeah,
I used to get inspired that how I can leave my job also to do something for any other country. So finally, after 12 years, I decided to come back. So it's good though you went in and you started the school.
yeah.
So, Jane, what ignites you to leave so far away from London to Uganda to start a school?
So I had been to Uganda for short visits, and I fell in love in the way that many people do with Uganda. The sunshine, the mango, the smiles, the relaxed nature of the people. But I was teaching in a school in East London, and it was extremely challenging. And I saw a magazine article about a school in Uganda, and exactly what went through my head was I could go to Uganda and I could live there. I could have more sunshine, more mango, and less stress. And that was my beginning. So prior to opening the school, I worked in Uganda as a volunteer for a year, living in a village for 6 months, and then in the capital city teaching adult literacy for 6 months. And when I lived there for that year, I realized that my journey wasn't over. That wasn't the end of it. So I actually moved to the US and did a master's and managed to tailor that master's in education to education in Uganda, and did quite a lot of research about AIDS in Uganda, about the schooling system comparative to England and Uganda. Had just the strongest urge to move there and do it. And I wasn't alone. There's a man a Ugandan co-founder of the organization, and a woman from New York. So it wasn't in any way a solo move. And obviously, as you knew, there were many people involved with fundraising and so on.
Yes.
I think I just felt an unquestionable connection, and I can't really describe it more than that.
Yeah. So you volunteered earlier, so that's how you got really inspired to do something for the country, and you have read about it and got exposed to it. Then you really got
Yeah,
urged to do it and start a school.
yeah. So I lived there for a year and then studied for about maybe 2 years.
Did you ever get tempted to go back to London? That happens with a lot of people and to lead a regular routine life after even starting a
Yeah,
school.
yeah. It's not. I don't think it's like in the fairy tales. I don't think there's one decision and then everything that follows is happily ever after.
Yes.
So I was really quite lonely at times, and anyone who's lived in a culture that's different to the one they were raised in can probably relate to that feeling of being an outsider, especially when there's a language barrier. So yeah, it was very difficult, and it was also very difficult because I was very inexperienced in many ways. So there would be very extreme problems, and I was at a loss to know how to respond on many occasions. And I'm very certain any person who does the kind of thing that I did has to be willing to be constantly corrected
Yes.
and create relationships with other people whereby other people are free to tell them what they think.
You're unknown to so
Yeah,
many things that you just jumped in. So, language is a barrier and culture is different. School education
yeah,
system is different and people are different.
yeah,
Traditions are different. So, you'll be definitely challenged with many things. but with the inspiration, I think you would have went ahead and
Yeah, I think it's impossible to do anything useful in life if you're not willing to learn from your mistakes. I think that. I think people have to accept they will make mistakes.
Yes.
They have to prepare themselves as far as is possible to avoid mistakes, but knowing that they're inevitable, be absolutely willing to learn from them. Because it's very clear to me that in all aspects of life, whether living abroad or home or doing work for an NGO or not, ego is a massive, massive driving force for all of us, and it's something that we have to learn to keep in the right proportion.
Yes, yes. How did you start the school? Like you have involved in the construction or the structure of it, or just teaching part of it?
So actually, we took a lot of advice from people, and particularly looked at very, very big humanitarian organizations. And in Africa, at that point in time, there was an acknowledgement that it didn't make sense to keep on building new structures and investing in new structures. One of the reasons was, in a lot of case studies, there had been NGOs that had built schools that were intended for people from resource poor backgrounds. And then those schools became very successful, had often been handed over to become autonomous organizations, and then they'd been co-opted by the middle classes. And so they would end up being, those people the school was intended for were often being run out of the school. So we were warned not to invest heavily in infrastructure. So we simply rented a house, and then we added semi-permanent structures to it, so that it met all the criteria for the government in terms of running as a school. But we didn't invest in infrastructure so much.
Yeah, initially, I think that's a good, wise decision unless you familiarize with the school.
Yeah, important to keep a focus on what is the actual mission, vision, and values of the organization.
Yeah.
And the truth is, education can happen in many different spaces. It doesn't actually have to always happen in four walls. And one of my greatest learning experiences, we had very strong relationships with the parents and family members of the children in the school, was coming out of class and seeing one of the parents squatting on the floor with a whole circle of children around him. And he had realized that the soil was very full of clay. And so he'd just got some clay from the soil and some water, and he was just teaching them how to make pots. And I just remember being absolutely astounded. So nobody had come to this man with a project proposal. Nobody had asked him to set up a parent-student cooperative or da-da-da-da-da. He just was doing what he knew. And the children were like amazed, because that was something they could go home and they could do. And for me, that's quite key, is to look at what is available locally and use whatever skills and resources are already in existence. I don't think it's about building a brand new shiny building that looks out of place.
Krishnamurti schools, or with involving parents and kids and teachers. So that combination has become really, more natural, more easy to follow, more fun added to it, I feel.
Yeah, it's to be truly transformational. There has to be an acknowledgement that all people have innate value and worth and knowledge, and all people have a natural desire to learn. So the fixing is important on a macro level, but it's very important that people have an awareness of their own place within the system which they find themselves in.
Yeah, we label them. I think a lot of people, our labeling is different. They're actually poor in many ways, mentally, intellectually, and maybe they're not having proper food, then we label them as poor. but actually they are more intellectual, they are more intelligent, they are more fun loving people, we can consider them as, right? So it is
Yeah,
all about
yeah,
de-labeling them, outsiders going into those countries and labeling them as poor.
yeah. And I think the key thing is also is to have an awareness of the key data points, if you want to call it that.
Mm.
So, of course, if a child does not have a good diet, their ability to develop cognitively is going to be impaired. So
Yes.
there's no point just pretending that isn't a fact. It is a fact.
Yes.
But of course, everyone is also an individual. So within any group of people, there will be people who are more prone to laugh, and there'll be people who are more maybe prone to be melancholy, and so on. And so to treat any, I don't know, males, females,
Yes.
by
Yes.
race or by wealth as being one homogenous group is grossly inaccurate. And I think that's the challenge that we all have, is to look past the labels and to not just take them as facts.
Yes. Yes. Address them and nurture them, nurture the students based on their learning capabilities or the way they are, just accepting them and nurturing them. That is the key, I think, rather than giving one just solution and one book. That is what it is, the education system is.
Education is notoriously hard because we're dealing with individuals, but we're also dealing with them as a collective. And that's the challenge that educator will constantly find, is how to nurture an individual personality and abilities and capabilities whilst maintaining that we have to function as a collective.
How was the support from your family and friends? Of course, it's really, challenging decision you took boldly and went ahead.
It was very good. People were like very enthusiastic and very encouraging and very helpful in terms of being practical. I found it actually very hard to return. So I had a culture shock when I went, and I had a culture shock when I came back. And so typically, a lot of people would say to me, "Oh, how was your time in Uganda? It must have been amazing." And then they would say, "I bet all of the students were really grateful." And then they might even follow up with something like, people who don't have much are often very grateful, And I kind of realized that the truth was, a lot of people didn't want to hear the reality, which was very complex and nuanced. And they wanted to hear just a bit like a fairy tale. You went.
Yeah, because it's a real experience is different. We always, think we have plans when we wanted to do something, but the reality is different. We just need to fill in the reality and then go ahead and accepting the challenges and
We have to embrace reality. And in that reality, there is pain, there is suffering, there is joy, there is laughter, and it might all be in very unexpected places. Like you said, it might be sitting with someone who, I sat with a man who was dying of AIDS, and he was leaving behind 5 children. And it was a horrendous situation. His children were going to have no parents, and the youngest was 18 months old. And bizarrely, we found so much to laugh about. And the same with his wife, who was also dying. I found so much to be inspired by from her example to me about how to live and how to die. So I think it's essential, isn't it, that we engage with the reality that we're in, and we maintain humility all the way, that we don't know what the world will bring to us, and we just have to surrender control sometimes, and just accept where we are, and be willing to be where we are.
yeah, it's a very deep experience to see when people are dying and they are able to live normal life. After knowing
Yeah, I mean,
also, it is very, very difficult.
Yeah, and I think just to allow people, pitying people is a very, very dangerous
Yes.
way to be.
Yes.
And I've never known anybody feel dignified through pity. And I used to keep it. I always used to keep to mind, like, the word compassion actually means with suffering. So to have compassion for someone means to be with them in their suffering. And that for me has always been helpful. Like, to some extent, we have to be willing to step into the mix with people. Obviously, boundaries are really important, and so on. But if we are not willing to feel some pain, I think we won't make any progress.
And yeah, obviously we cannot show the real compassion unless you feel they,
Yeah.
you know, how your teaching methods are different, like fun skills with the kids rather than teaching by looking at the class books. So what kind of a different techniques you have used, played around with the kids?
So Uganda has a really good curriculum for early years, and we were a primary school for starting with the early years, and we built on a class every year. So they're very much about, they call it the thematic curriculum. So you have a topic and you explore that topic through all the subjects. And the curriculum is incredible. We used play and children learning through the senses. So lots of touching things, like, for example, the students cultivated we had like a garden, cultivated the garden. They got to see things from start to finish. So, for example, they would see all the food be brought in from the market, and then see it all weighed, and then all of the, like, potato peelings and so on, they would be part of putting them in the compost and turning the compost, using the compost to help grow the plants. So when we taught agriculture, it was essentially outside, experiential, children being part of it and getting to observe it. So as much as was possible, we made everything practical.
Senses also, they can feel and touch and see all these, that you're able to show them like in a fun way, rather than we have 5 senses, these are the senses, and showing it, it's really, they can touch the vegetable, they can see something, and they can count it, mostly outside rather than inside.
There was a lot of being outside, yeah. Yeah, and then things. So we used to do, we used to get students to get old plastic bags, and then they plaited them, and then they made their own skipping ropes. So all those types of things where we tried to use the resources that were available so that they could take from school to home what they had learned, so they could have skipping ropes at home. They used to do the same with little rubber balls, make balls out of plastic bags. So all those kind of things. One of my most what can I say, inspiring lessons that I and my colleagues taught a lesson with the kids as a means to teach a train, and it was teaching a science lesson about what makes things float. And the challenge that we gave ourselves was that we were only allowed to ask questions. We weren't allowed to tell the children anything. So the children were put into groups, and they each had a basin, and they had full of water, and they had different materials. And the challenge was, could they come up with a statement that would correctly explain why things floated? And so we would ask them, okay, which has floated? The empty plastic cup or the stone? So then they would try it and see. And it was incredible, because by the end of the lesson, one group had managed to explain to the other group what makes an object float. So that was much more memorable than a teacher starting the lesson at the board saying, an object floats when it is less dense, da, 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 da. So that was our aim, was that we wanted children to learn through experience and enjoy the process of learning. The outcome would naturally come if the process is correct.
Exactly. That learn through experience is the biggest, it's very powerful statement actually, that learn through experience. Once you experience the same thing, cycling, once you do it, 70-year-old, they can still remember the same thing once you do it. So then kids doesn't have to read by the books. Once they see it and do it, by that practical experience is very important. So that made kids to come to the school also, right? Motivating for the kids to join the schools and involve in the school studies.
Yeah, I mean, our students loved being at school. They absolutely loved coming to school. They wanted school to last longer than it did.
Yeah, exactly. So that's how school's supposed to be, fun, a lot of fun with the other kids at the same time, the teachers too.
They're grown up now, they're adults, and I keep in touch with many of them, and they still talk about that as being the best time of their life.
Wow, that's a great thing you have achieved as a teacher. That's what supposed to be. When the kids, grown up and they call you and talk childhood memories, that means, yeah, they still remember and those fun times.
And I think the central thing, though, for all people, but particularly for children, is they need to feel safe. And they feel safe with adults who they know have love and respect for them. And when you have that relationship with your students, one of respect and interest and being curious about your students, what excites them and interests them, they will learn. If they feel threatened and despised or intimidated, it becomes a whole nother journey, because the truth is we're aiming for lifelong learners. We're not just aiming for learners to pass the next exam and make us look good. Education is, I feel like the education is the gift where you really give away as much as you possibly can, and you're delighted when someone is better than you. So for any good teacher, you feel delighted when your students are better than you at whatever you thought you were good at.
Thank you, Jane. It's namaste. It's really, great eye-opening for me, because that experience that kids should feel that, it's a lifelong journey that they learn in the school. Those lessons, they will carry on along with their life. It's not only the typical 5-year or 10-year tenure in the schools. So that is a very, very important thing that needs to be taught in the schools. How did you manage with the culture? And the food is different and the climate is different. People are different. So it might be a little bit of cultural shock initially, and language is a barrier. How did you engage the other teachers and local people and parents get involved in this project personally?
I think the biggest honest truth is time. You can't hurry things. What's that song? You can't hurry love. You just got to wait. I think if a person is determined, they're willing to give it time. Exactly. And there's one example. So we used to so a lot of resources obviously are very Eurocentric, even in Africa. So the books will have white children in, dolls will be white, and so on. And we had a rule that we would not accept any books that didn't reflect our students. So people would always donate books in England, but we were not going to have a library full of white children. So we ended up making our own books, and we bought these little wooden figurines, like movable little dolls, and we would make books using those as characters, and we'd then make flashcards and laminate them. And I remember one evening, it was really, really late, and I was in the office making these flashcards for our students, and it was really boring. And I remember thinking to myself, do you love these people, these children, enough that you're willing to be bored? And for me, that's always been a question that I've asked myself when it comes to commitment, because I love drama, I love action. I'm okay with people who are all emotional and going through difficult times. I kind of come alive. I'm in that moment. But boredom is the worst experience for me. And I think for me, and this is my personality type, that's where I have to rise up, be willing to be bored, because sometimes the journey is long. Give it time. Give it space, and then it happened. Very lucky. I studied anthropology in my master's, and my supervisor, I had two supervisors, they're both anthropologists, and I was talking to my supervisor about a situation, actually with someone who was Indian, and just talking about that situation and not liking that person and not understanding this and that. And she said one sentence that has stayed with me and will stay with me for the rest of my life. And she said, "Why are you getting emotional? This person is just following their cultural script." So I was taking it as two individuals who have a personality clash. And my supervisor made me think about it totally differently, which is, you have your culture where you have been raised to think that the way you think and feel is universally normal. And it's not. I am a product of my culture. This other person has been raised to think the way they think and feel is universally normal. And it's not. They're a product of their culture. And the two of you are now together, and you're thinking that you have a problem with each other as an individual. And the truth is, it's much bigger than that. And that is exceptionally helpful, because whenever I'm in a situation, and I can be in the situation here now teaching teenagers in England, where I have to ask myself, is what's happening personal to me, or is it something else? Because the worst thing is when people take things personally that aren't intended to be personal, or which aren't personal, they end up in a cycle that is quite destructive. But when we can step back and detach ourselves somewhat and get a different sense of it, you can keep moving forward. And I really think that is essential, that level of just having a space between us and our feelings, so that we don't end up constantly tossed around by what we're experiencing in the moment.
Yeah.
Because I think, I don't know how it is for you, but I mean, maybe when you first lived in America, it's very easy just to, I don't know, feel different all the time, or have a whole range of feelings, which might not be pleasant. But when you get some perspective on it, you can be quite logical about it and say, oh, okay, so this is, I don't know, something like someone not taking their shoes off in your house can feel really offensive and rude and insulting, and yet when you think, okay, they don't do that in their house, so they're not doing anything rude to me or disrespectful, but I can ask them or tell them, please, in my house, we just leave our shoes here. So to avoid situations becoming more full of conflict than necessary, I think that's important.
Yeah, whatever we have, our culture is supreme. Yeah, exactly. That culture we have in India, that I also had that. What are they doing? They're not even leaving the shoes outside, and they're walking with the shoes. It's a little bit of, surprise for me also when I moved to US and lived there for so long. Then now I realize, okay, it's just their habit of doing it. That's okay. I think once you observe and see a different perspective, then you just go along with them. Rather than thinking ours is different. So when you move back to London after so many years spending in Uganda, it might be a different world for you, right?
Yeah, it was very hard. I found it actually very hard, to be honest with you. Children are ruder in England. That's a fact. People seem to be a little bit more stressed in the UK. There were lots and lots of things I miss very much about being in Uganda. In Uganda, people are very generous with time, typically speaking. Remember once waiting for somebody, and the transport network is really can be very difficult. So lots of mud roads. and if it rains, it will take ages to get somewhere. So I was meeting somebody from a village in another village, and they were 2 hours late because of the roads. And I bumped into somebody I knew, and he stood and we talked for 2 hours. And he said to me, that wouldn't happen in London, would it? And I said, no, nobody would be that generous. And it wasn't like he was doing it to be kind. It was like, of course I'll talk with you for 2 hours. This is a great chance for us to catch up.
How generous people are in Uganda.
People I know in Uganda, many of them, are incredibly generous and kind, beyond which anybody like myself has ever been or probably ever will be. So we had a woman at our school called Alice, and she was the cleaner, and she was an incredibly sensitive and caring woman. And we had a student who had been placed with us who came from very, very, very difficult situation, and he didn't have anywhere to live. And she had a very humble home of one room, and it was her and her daughter. And she accepted to raise this boy, and he had lots of problems because of the background he came from. Mm-hmm. And she took it on. And even now, years and years later, he still keeps in contact with her. He still, refers to her as his mum. So, yeah, I mean,
a lot to learn from them. I mean, I'm really amazed to listen to this story, because if she is cleaning and maybe very, minimal paid, still she has only little room with her own kid, still taking upon another kid and taking care of the kid with her little money, then that is a lot to learn from that story, from the real life.
And it's not that it was easy. I always remember someone else telling me that, oh, you think that you can't do this and it's easy for us to do it because we do it. But it's not easy for us either. And that's another thing that happens, is that when a person is in a different culture, they often see something and make assumptions. And this person was right to correct me. I had kind of thought, oh, I couldn't take such a child in. I couldn't offer that, or how it would impact my life and so on, which is fine. And that was the truth for me. But I had then assumed it was easy for the cleaner to do it. And that was entirely a wrong assumption. It wasn't that it was easy. It was hard.
Yes.
It was just that she was willing.
Yes.
And I wasn't willing. And I think that's important, not to assume that we know how something is for some. I had 5 children who their parents died, but I became, they call it executor of the will. So I kind of have looked after them since 2003. So they're grown up now, but we're still there. I consider them to be my family. Yeah, so their parents died while I was there. Okay. And then I took over a role in helping provide for them.
Okay. Yeah. What you are currently doing in UK after moving back from Uganda?
Yeah, so I'm not actually in London. I'm on the south coast. I'm working in a school for children who've been at risk of being excluded, meaning like thrown out of school. And actually, it's a vocational school, so they learn either hairdressing or construction, automotive, hospitality, so on. But they still have to do English, maths and science. So I teach English.
Wow, that's a special school. That's pretty interesting.
Yeah, it is very lively.
Yeah, I have seen a lot of changes in your life as well as my life too after 15 years. I've seen only the pictures, because I haven't seen you even personally. This is the first time after 15 years. So you got married to Ugandan, right?
Yeah.
How did that happen?
So those children I told you about whose parents died, there was an angle over the land. So their father had left them land in his will, and then some people had seen them as kind of weak because they're orphans, and had tried to essentially steal that land for themselves. So whilst teaching in London, I'd got time off and gone to Uganda to begin legal proceedings to try to secure that land for them. And they had a need of lots of documents. So I was at a loss because I had a limited time to get all these documents. And I had meetings with lawyers and I had to get back to London to go to work. So a friend of mine said, oh, I know someone who's really good at things like that. So introduced me to this man who helped me. And that man is my husband now. Oh. So there was a lot that happened in between with the documents and become my husband, but that's the beginning.
Oh, that's a very interesting story, because both are in helping that family. So that's a good way of meeting somebody who are in more compassionate. That's what everybody needs.
Yeah.
So Jane, what is the takeaway for people who wants to start a project in any different country or their own country, start completely new, which they are not experienced about it, but they really wanted to start it? So what kind of advice do you leave for them?
Like, you have to go and be open-minded. If you're going to do something different, be open-minded, be willing to learn, be humble. Look around you, observe people so you can learn. But I think sometimes from Europe and maybe North America, we've watched so many films or TV where everything is just reduced to sort of simple formulas. And obviously that's not real life. I would say, first of all, if you really feel a connection and you really feel it's something you're meant to do it. You might feel afraid, accept that it might not turn out the way you had in mind for it to go, but don't be paralyzed by living the kind of life that you're in. There are other ways to live. So for me, one of the great inspirations in my life, as for many people, is Nelson Mandela. And when I read his autobiography, it was clear to me that he was somebody who embraced, I wouldn't say embraced, that's entirely the wrong word, who accepted the reality he was in. Yes. He accepted all of the pain and suffering of apartheid, and he transformed that pain and suffering into action. So if he'd have just denied that it was bad, he wouldn't have got anywhere. But all the time when other people said it wasn't possible, he maintained the vision. And obviously, he had a great deal of patience and determination and commitment. So I would say, if a person wants to do a project, don't go in lightly. Go in with full commitment, because if you go in lightly and then you start something and people start to need what you're offering and then it just collapses, you've possibly created more problems than you've solved. So be patient, do your homework, meet with people, be part of a group, be committed, and be real. Yeah.
Great example. Nelson Mandela is like meaning for patience in the world. How much he waited. That's real example right there for us to learn. Thank you so much, Jane. We have learned that, how to do a practical education in the schools and how to go to a different country and live there and be with the people and learn their culture and respect them, respect their culture and be with them and understand their attitude and their behavior and go in tune with them when you teach them anything you wanted to communicate with them. Either it could be parents or kids or teachers, your colleagues. So that is the great lesson, that how one can, do things profound way.
Yeah.
Thank you very much. So much. Thank you for joining, Jane. It's really nice seeing you after 15 years and being on this podcast. And so the audience and me can learn so much, because these are real life stories I wanted to bring in to the table so that people can relate to it and they can learn from it and grow from it. Thank you, Jane. Thank you.
Yeah.
Thank you.
Bye.